In the sprawling, sun-bleached heart of Texas, where modern ambition often clashes with deep, old-world faith, a single act of calculated defiance would tear open a fissure between the rational and the divine. This is not just a story of a crime, but a chronicle of a haunting, a descent into a mystery where the rules of the world we know no longer seem to apply. If you find yourself drawn to tales that linger in the silence and challenge everything you think is real, please like and subscribe so you don't miss our future journeys into the shadowy corners of the unexplained. The digital clock on Chloe Mendez's laptop glowed 11:47 p.m., a tiny island of light in the profound darkness of her cramped campus apartment. The air conditioner hummed a weak, strained tune against the oppressive Austin humidity that seeped through every crack. Stacks of books on social theory, cognitive bias, and the anthropology of ritual formed precarious towers on her desk, their spines cracked and pages bristling with neon-colored tabs. At the center of it all was her thesis proposal, its title a stark, bold declaration, The Illusion of the Sacred. A study in provoked piety and social contagion. Chloe, 22 years old, with a mind like a razor and a conviction that the world's mysteries were just complex equations waiting to be solved, saw faith as the ultimate unsolved puzzle, a beautiful, dangerous, and entirely human construct. Her project was her magnum opus, her ticket out of Texas and into the hallowed halls of an Ivy League sociology PhD program. It was audacious, controversial, and brilliant. She would orchestrate a public desecration of a potent religious symbol and document the fallout. She would film the act, then the reactions, the outrage, the prayers, the news reports, the social media frenzy. She would analyze it all, dissecting the performative grief of the faithful and the opportunistic anger of the activists. It was, in her view, a perfect, controlled social experiment. The symbol she chose was not arbitrary. It was the 6-foot-tall limestone statue of the Virgin Mary that stood in a forgotten grotto on the university's periphery. The grotto was a relic, a leftover patch of land from a Catholic church that had been demolished in the 1960s to make way for a new science building. The university, perhaps out of a vague sense of historical guilt, had left the statue and its small circular enclosure of native stone, now overgrown with prickly pear and choked by the gnarled roots of ancient live oak trees. Students knew it as a place for secret beers or a quiet, if slightly spooky, shortcut. Its original name, Nuestra Señora de los Lamentos, Our Lady of Sorrows, had been lost to time, remembered only by a handful of octogenarians in the surrounding neighborhoods. To Chloe, it was perfect. It was old. It was neglected. But its symbolic power was undeniable. It was a catalyst waiting for a chemical reaction, and she had the match. She had assembled her team carefully, each member chosen for their specific utility. Mark Davies, her boyfriend of 2 years, was a mechanical engineering senior. Solid, reliable, pragmatic to a fault, with hands that could build or fix anything and a heart that belonged entirely to Chloe. His role was logistical: acquire the materials, ensure the experiment was executed efficiently. He loved her fierce intelligence even when it made him uneasy, and his love overrode his own quiet misgivings about the project's morality. Liam Chen was the artist, a film major with an eye for haunting composition and a thirst for a project with edge. He saw the world through a viewfinder, valuing aesthetic impact above all else. He was there to capture it all: the stark before, the violent during, and the emotional after. For him, this was a potential masterpiece of verite filmmaking. Sarah Abbott, a psychology major with a talent for statistical modeling and survey design, was the analyst. She would design the pre- and post-event surveys, crunch the numbers on social media engagement, and quantify the outrage. She was meticulous, cautious, and her constant nervous nail-biting was a testament to the low-grade anxiety that fueled her perfectionism. And then there was Jake Torres, the wild card. a philosophy major deeply immersed in existentialism and nihilism. He was the group's skeptic in residence. He wasn't there to help Chloe prove her thesis. He was there to observe the observers, to deconstruct the deconstructionists. He found the entire endeavor a fascinating display of human arrogance. "You think you're testing their faith," he'd said during one planning session, a cynical smile playing on his lips. "But you're really testing your own, your faith in reason in control. What happens if the experiment answers a question you weren't asking?" Chloe had waved him off. "There are no questions science can't ask, Jake." Now, on this sweltering night, the theory was about to become practice. The five of them moved like ghosts through the sleeping campus, the weight of their backpacks filled with equipment feeling heavier with every step. The air was thick with the scent of mountain laurel and distant barbecue smoke, a normal Texas night that felt anything but. The grotto was darker than the surrounding darkness, the canopy of oaks blocking the sliver of moon. Liam set up his camera on a tripod, its red recording light a single accusing eye. Mark unscrewed the cap on a can of lighter fluid, the chemical smell sharp and offensive in the natural air. Sarah clutched her tablet, ready to take notes, her breath coming in short, sharp puffs. And Chloe stood before the statue. In the dim light, the Virgin's face was all shadows, her expression one of eternal, gentle sorrow. Her hands were outstretched, palms up, as if accepting a great weight. For a fleeting second, a cold finger of doubt traced Chloe's spine. The statue felt present, not as an object, but as a witness. "This is it," Chloe whispered, her voice tight with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "The genesis point. Remember, we are documenting a phenomenon. We are not the phenomenon." Mark stepped forward, dousing the base of the statue with the fluid. The liquid splashed against the pale stone, darkening it. The smell intensified, choking and industrial. "Liam, you rolling?" Chloe asked. "Rolling," Liam confirmed, his voice a low murmur behind the camera. Chloe pulled a cheap disposable lighter from her pocket. Her thumb found the ridged wheel. The click echoed in the silent grotto, absurdly loud. A small yellow flame sprang to life, dancing in the stillness. For a moment, she held it there, a tiny, defiant star against the immense, quiet darkness. She saw her future in that flame, the acclaim, the scholarly articles, the vindication. She touched the flame to the soaked stone. The fire didn't just catch, it erupted. With a low whoomp, flames raced up the statue's robes, fueled by the volatile fluid. For a few seconds, the entire lower half of the Virgin was engulfed in a roaring orange and blue inferno. The intense heat forced them all back a step. The light was brutal and unforgiving, throwing monstrous dancing shadows against the grotto walls, transforming the serene face above into a terrifying mask of flickering light and deep, moving darkness. Liam zoomed in, capturing the horrifying beauty of it. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark stared, his face a mask of shock, the reality of the act far more visceral than the theory. Jake simply watched, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The fiery baptism was short-lived. The lighter fluid burned fast and hot, and within 90 seconds, the flames began to die, shrinking back to a sullen smolder. Thick, acrid smoke coiled into the air, carrying the stench of burned chemicals and faintly, something else, something oddly organic, like scorched hair or bone. As the fire receded, it left its mark. A great blackened scar ran up the Virgin's side and across her draped stone robes. The pristine limestone was now covered in a grotesque weeping soot. The act was complete. The five of them stood in silence, the only sound the crackle of cooling stone and Liam's camera whirring softly. The adrenaline that had propelled them began to ebb, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling in its wake. The grotto felt different, colder. The darkness around them felt more substantial, as if it were pressing in. "Okay," Chloe said, her voice sounding too loud and too bright in the aftermath. That's a wrap for Phase 1. Liam, get some establishing shots of the damage. We'll come back at first light. They packed up their gear with clumsy, hurried movements, no one wanting to be the last to leave. They didn't speak as they filed out of the grotto and back onto the main path, the well-lit normality of the campus feeling like a different planet. They didn't look back. If they had, they might have seen the way the tendrils of smoke seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have, twisting into strange, suggestive shapes before dissolving. They might have felt the weight of a gaze, ancient and sorrowful, following their retreat. The next morning, the hangover began, not from alcohol, but from action. Chloe sat at her desk, sunlight flooding her apartment, and plugged Liam's high-definition camera into her computer. She double-clicked the video file, eager to review the footage, to see the powerful visual evidence of their experiment. An error message popped up. File format not recognized. Frowning, she tried again. Same error. She tried a different media player, then another. Nothing. The file was there, taking up gigabytes of space, but it was a ghost, a digital void, a profound nothingness where their central piece of evidence should have been. Liam was apoplectic. That's impossible, he insisted when she called him. It was a brand new card. I formatted it myself. The camera was working perfectly. It has to be your computer. But it wasn't her computer. The file was corrupt on every machine they tried. The phone footage they'd taken as backup was equally useless, grainy, shaky, and mysteriously, the focus was soft and blurry whenever it pointed directly at the burning statue, as if an unseen hand was smudging the lens. The primary data set for their perfect experiment was gone. It was their first casualty. The second was Mark. 2 days after the incident, he was working in the university's advanced fabrication lab. He was using an industrial-grade polisher on a piece of titanium for his senior project. He'd done the procedure a dozen times before, but this time, the metal under the intense friction suddenly heated to a critical point and shattered. A shard of white-hot metal, no bigger than a fingernail, shot across the room like a bullet. It missed the safety glass of his goggles and embedded itself in his temple, just below his hairline. The pain was instant and excruciating. His friends rushed him to the emergency room, where a doctor numbed the area and carefully extracted the fragment. "You are one incredibly lucky young man," the doctor said, stitching the clean linear burn. "A centimeter to the right, and we'd be talking about a very different outcome." Mark looked at his reflection in the glass of a medical cabinet. The wound was raw and angry, stitched neatly. It was a perfect dark line on his skin. Later, lying in his bed, a thought surfaced through the painkillers. He found a photo of the grotto statue on the university's historical archive website. He zoomed in on the face. There, on the Virgin's cheek, was a stylized carving, a single line representing a tear, the tear they had blackened with soot. His new wound was in the exact same place, the exact same shape, a perfect, terrible symmetry. He dismissed it immediately. A coincidence, a freak accident. He was an engineer. He believed in forces, pressures, and material failures, not in cosmic punishment. But the cold seed of doubt was planted. The grotto itself began to sicken. The groundskeeping crew, who made a semi-annual effort to tidy the area, were the first to notice the change. The lush St. Augustine grass that had surrounded the statue was now brown and brittle, as if scorched by a relentless sun, though the rest of the campus was green. The vibrant, deep green leaves of the live oaks were turning a sickly yellow, then falling prematurely, carpeting the ground in a crunchy dead layer. When the foreman, a man named Hector, who had worked for the university for 30 years, saw the blackened statue, he crossed himself. "Cabrones," he muttered under his breath. "Stupid kids." He got a pressure washer and an industrial-grade cleaner, determined to wash away the vandalism. But the black stain wouldn't budge. It wasn't on the surface. It had somehow seeped into the stone. a permanent, deep-seated blight. The more he sprayed, the more the dark stain seemed to weep a thin, oily residue, making the stone around it slick and dark. He gave up, a superstitious dread settling in his stomach. The story of the vandalism hit the campus newspaper, a small blurb on page 4. It was seen as a petty crime, an act of senseless disrespect. But it caught the eye of an elderly woman named Florence Gable, who had lived in the shadow of the university for all of her 82 years. She walked her aging dachshund Fritz past the grotto every single morning. When she saw the desecration, she stopped short, her hand flying to her chest. Fritz whined, pulling at his leash, suddenly eager to be away from the place. The air felt wrong to Florence. It felt heavy and cold, and the smell of smoke, though faint, still clung to the stones. She saw the dead grass, the dying trees. She remembered the stories her own mother had told her, stories whispered in Spanish and broken English. A journalism student, a young man named Ben Carter with ambitions of breaking the next Watergate, was doing a follow-up piece on campus crime. He saw Florence staring at the grotto, her face pale. He approached her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Florence turned to him, her eyes wide. "They shouldn't have done it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They've woken her up." "Woken who?" Ben asked, pulling out his notebook. "Nuestra Señora de los Lamentos, Our Lady of Sorrows. This is her place. They say she was carved from a stone that wept for the lost children." Ben scribbled notes, a cynical smile on his face. This was great local color. "Lost children?" "The flood," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, as if reciting a well-known tale. "Back in 1921, the river rose in the night, took a whole schoolhouse, 12 little ones, their mothers, their fathers. They prayed for a miracle. When the waters went down, this statue was found right here, clean as a whistle, not a speck of mud on her. But her face was wet. They said she wept tears of spring water for the babies she couldn't save. They built this grotto for her then. She's a mother who knows loss. She doesn't take kindly to being mocked." Ben thanked her and included the anecdote in his article, framing it as a quaint piece of local folklore. The 5 students read it online and laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "Tears of spring water," Liam scoffed. "Probably just condensation." But the article had unearthed something. The name Nuestra Señora de los Lamentos began to circulate. People who had never given the statue a second glance now looked at it with a flicker of unease. The grotto, once ignored, became a place of uneasy pilgrimage. Students would dare each other to go there at night. Others would leave small makeshift offerings, a single flower, a handwritten note, at the base as if in apology. For the 5 involved, the world began to tilt on its axis. The string of misfortunes escalated from oddities into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Sarah's nightmares began. They were not vague anxieties, but vivid cinematic horrors. She dreamt of being trapped in a roiling black river, its water thick as oil, pulling her under. Silhouettes of children stood on the bank, silent and watching, while the stone statue looked on, its face a mask of grief, black tears streaming down its cheeks. She'd wake up gasping, her pillow and sheets soaked with a cold sweat that carried the distinct gagging smell of kerosene. The smell would linger in her room for hours. She started avoiding sleep, her eyes becoming hollowed-out pits in her pale face. Her hands developed a persistent, uncontrollable tremor that made holding a pen or typing impossible. She had to request extensions on her finals, her perfect GPA suddenly under threat. Jake, the philosopher, found himself strangely drawn to the grotto. He began to spend hours there, not as a participant, but as an observer. He noticed the unnatural silence first. The constant chirping of crickets, the rustle of squirrels in the leaves, it all stopped within a 20-foot radius of the statue. Birds would alter their flight paths to avoid flying over it. It was an ecological dead zone, and people, when they approached, would often stop short, a look of profound sadness or unease crossing their faces before they quickly turned and walked away. He tried to rationalize it, the power of suggestion, the unsettling visual of the vandalism. But his rationalizations began to feel feeble, intellectual toys that were useless against the raw, sensory reality of the place. Driven by a new, urgent curiosity, he began to research in earnest. He spent days in the dimly lit university archives, poring over microfiche records of old Austin newspapers. He found the account of the 1921 flood. The numbers were staggering, the tragedy palpable. He found a small, single-paragraph article mentioning the discovery of the unharmed statue and the comfort it brought to the grieving families. The legend of the tears wasn't in the official record, but he found it in personal diaries donated to the Historical Society, in transcribed oral histories from the descendants of the original Mexican and Irish settlers. The stories were consistent. The statue was found dry amidst the mud, but with wet cheeks, and there were other darker stories. A farmer who tried to break the statue for fill dirt was said to have lost his entire herd to a mysterious illness. A group of drunken men who defaced it in the 1950s reportedly all met with separate, violent ends within a year. A car wreck, a fall from a roof, a hunting accident. He brought his findings to the group. They met in a sterile, brightly lit study room in the library, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The bravado was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. "Her name is Nuestra Señora de los Lamentos," Jake said, spreading photocopied pages of diary entries and old maps on the table. "This isn't just some random statue. It has a history, a power. People have been having bad luck around it for a century." "Power?" Chloe's voice was sharp, but it lacked its former conviction. Dark circles framed her eyes. "It's a story, Jake, a folk tale. You're documenting the social contagion we sparked. This is exactly what I predicted. People attributing meaning to random events." "Then explain the video file," Liam said, his voice quiet. He hadn't been able to get his camera to work properly since that night. The electronics seemed permanently fried. "Explain Mark's face. Explain why every piece of footage we have is glitched or blurred. Explain why Sarah's apartment smells like a gas station." "Coincidence, confirmation bias," Chloe insisted, but she was clinging to the fraying rope of her worldview, her knuckles white. "The historical accounts," Jake pressed, his tone grave. "They don't just talk about grief, they talk about reflection. The statue doesn't cause bad luck, it mirrors it. It reflects the disrespect back onto the disrespected. It makes your inner state, your outer reality." A heavy, terrified silence fell over the group. They were no longer researchers. They were the primary subjects. The experiment was on them. The warnings escalated from personal misfortune to tangible, physical phenomena. Mark's senior design project, the one he was working on when he was injured, failed catastrophically during its final demonstration before the faculty review board. A fundamental, inexplicable flaw in the core programming caused it to shudder apart. His dream internship vanished. Sarah's neurological tremor was diagnosed as acute stress-induced, but no therapy could stop it. She had to withdraw from her finals, her future in psychology now a heartbreaking question mark. Liam's entire digital portfolio, years of work stored on a brand new external hard drive, was completely wiped by a corruption that data recovery experts called highly unusual and aggressive. They were being systematically dismantled, their futures crumbling to ash. Chloe, desperate to reassert control, to prove it was all mass hysteria, went back to the grotto alone one afternoon. She would take samples of the stone, prove the stain was just superficial carbon scoring. She brought a new DSLR camera, determined to get a clear picture. The grotto was freezing, a pocket of deep chill in the warm spring afternoon. The silence was absolute. She stood before the statue, the Virgin's sorrowful gaze now feeling like a physical weight upon her. The black stain seemed even darker, more visceral. Chloe raised the camera, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She looked through the viewfinder, focused, and pressed the shutter button halfway to activate the autofocus. The image on the digital screen swam. For a single, heart-stopping second, the autofocus locked not on the stone, but on the dark stain. And in that moment, Chloe didn't see soot. She saw a thick, dark, viscous liquid like crude oil or clotting blood, welling from the wound they had made and tracing a glistening path down the stone cheek. And in the Virgin's eyes, she saw not carved stone, but a deep, infinite and living pain, a mother's bottomless grief. She screamed, stumbling backward, the camera falling from her nerveless fingers and cracking on the stone pavement. She didn't stop to retrieve it. She ran, her heart hammering against her ribs, the rational world she had built her life upon shattering into a million pieces. She had seen it. She had finally seen it. The climax began not with a spectacle, but with a pervasive, intimate wrongness. It started in Chloe's apartment. The faint, unmistakable scent of smoke returned, but now it was constant. It was in her clothes, her hair, her food. She could taste it on her tongue, a perpetual reminder of their sin. Soon, the others reported the same phantom smell, a personal miasma that followed each of them everywhere, a badge of their guilt that only they could perceive. Then the dreams became shared, synchronous. They would wake at the same time, 3:17 a.m., their phones buzzing with texts from each other, all describing the same nightmare. The grotto, the statue weeping black tears, and the silent, mud-covered children of the flood pointing at them from the shadows. The boundary between their individual consciousnesses was dissolving, replaced by a shared, terrifying psychic space. The 5 students, once the epitome of bright, ambitious youth, became hollowed-out shells. They stopped attending classes entirely. They moved into Chloe's apartment, not out of camaraderie, but out of a primal, terrified need for a shared witness, a desperate hope that they couldn't all be going insane at once. They knew with a certainty that bypassed logic and rooted itself in their very bones that something was coming, a final reckoning, a conclusion to their experiment that their thesis had never envisioned. It arrived on the anniversary of the 1921 flood, a date none of them had known but Jake, who discovered it in his research and felt a cold dread settle in his soul. A spring storm of biblical proportions settled over Austin. The sky turned a bruised, sickly green. The rain didn't fall. It was a solid wall of water, hurled by shrieking winds that bent trees double. Lightning walked across the hills in great blinding strides, and the thunder was a continuous apocalyptic roar. The power died across the city. In the darkness of Chloe's apartment, the 5 of them huddled together, listening to the storm scream and the phantom crackle of fire that only they could hear. Mark was trying to board up a rattling window when a particularly violent gust shattered the glass, sending a shard slicing across his forearm, another perfect linear wound. Sarah was curled in a ball, rocking back and forth, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over again. Liam stared blankly at a wall, his filmmaker's eye seeing only a terrifying final cut. Jake sat at the table, calmly reading from a book of philosophy, his voice a low monotone against the chaos, a final, futile act of intellectual defiance. And in the grotto, the rain fell in torrents, washing over the blackened statue. But the black stain did not fade. It seemed to deepen, to drink the water, to pulse like a living wound. A bolt of lightning, a searing white-hot spear of pure energy, struck the tallest live oak at the edge of the grotto. The ancient tree exploded into a million splinters, the sound lost in the howl of the wind. But the lightning did not simply earth itself, it jumped. Dozens of witnesses, people trapped in cars on the nearby road, families huddled in their homes, would later swear to it with a unified, trembling testimony that would become the bedrock of the new legend. The lightning arced from the shattered tree to the crown of the stone virgin. For 3 full seconds, the statue was crowned in a blinding, silent nimbus of white fire. The light didn't scatter or explode. It focused on her, enveloping her in a cocoon of incandescent energy, etching every detail of her sorrowful face and outstretched hands against the pitch-black sky with impossible, terrifying clarity. It was a moment of breathtaking, awful beauty, and then it was gone. The storm didn't taper off. It ceased, as if a switch had been thrown. The wind died. The relentless rain became a drizzle, then stopped completely. An eerie, profound silence fell over the city, broken only by the drip of water from 1,000 gutters. The power flickered back on across Austin. In Chloe's apartment, the lights blazed to life. The frantic wind died, leaving a sudden, deafening quiet. Mark's bleeding arm, which had been flowing steadily, simply stopped. The cut, while still there, seemed to calm. Sarah stopped rocking. She uncurled, looking around with a dazed expression, the relentless mantra of apology dying on her lips. The oppressive smell of smoke that had haunted them for weeks was simply gone. The air was clean, washed and charged with a strange, peaceful energy. The weight was lifted. Word spread through texts and calls. Something had happened at the grotto. A crowd began to gather, drawn by an impulse they didn't understand, a collective need to witness. The 5 of them, moving as one, drove to the grotto. They pushed through the gathering crowd, their hearts pounding not with fear, but with a tremulous, awe-filled dread. The grotto was transformed. The circle of dead brown grass was gone, replaced by a carpet of lush, emerald-green grass, so vibrantly alive it seemed to glow. The blackened, leafless trees were now in full, glorious bloom, their branches heavy with white flowers that gave off a sweet, intoxicating scent, a variety no botanist could immediately identify. The air itself was sweet and clear, smelling of jasmine and ozone and fresh rain. But all eyes were on the statue. The lightning strike had done the impossible. It had not shattered the limestone. It had sheared away the surface and the dark, oily residue of their desecration. In its place, revealed beneath the soot and the ancient stone, was a deep, undeniable vein of mineral that ran in a perfect, unbroken line from the wound on the statue's side down the folds of her robe to the base. It was a stunning, rose-colored quartz, a hue not found anywhere else in the local geology. It gleamed in the emerging sunlight, wet from the rain, and it looked for all the world like a miraculous, beautiful scar. And from the eyes of the Virgin, 2 identical, delicate veins of the same rose-colored stone trailed down her cheeks. She was weeping, not with the black soot of their desecration, but with tears of rose quartz, a permanent, miraculous testament to sorrow, forgiveness, and the indelible scar of a wrong that had been witnessed, answered, and transformed into something else entirely. It was not a punishment. It was a transfiguration, an undeniable, physical miracle, a new legend born from an act of profound disrespect. The 5 students stood together, not as researchers, but as penitents. They finally understood. They had set out to study the performance of piety and had instead been confronted by its awesome, terrifying reality. They had sought to prove faith was a social contagion and had been cured by it themselves. The data they had so desperately sought was now written in stone before them, more profound than any survey result or corrupted video file. News crews arrived within the hour. The story exploded, making national headlines. Scientists took core samples of the stone, baffled by the perfect, precise vein of rose quartz that defied all known geological models. Geologists called it a one-in-a-billion natural occurrence, a freak result of the lightning's unique energy signature superheating and reforming minerals in the stone. The church sent investigators who spoke of a sign, a message of mercy, and the enduring power of a mother's love, a divine artist transforming an act of hate into a work of sacred beauty. The university, after a period of stunned silence and internal scandal, quietly erected a discreet plaque near the grotto, telling the story of Nuestra Señora de los Lamentos and the miracle of the roses. The grotto was no longer a forgotten relic. It became a place of pilgrimage, not of sorrow, but of hope, healing, and second chances. People came from all over, leaving flowers, praying, touching the cool, rose-colored scars, and feeling a peace that was both gentle and immense. The 5 students never spoke publicly about their role. It was an unspoken pact between them. They finished their degrees in a kind of quiet daze, their lives irrevocably altered. The project was never mentioned again. Chloe never finished her thesis. She left sociology behind entirely. After graduation, she spent a year working with a Catholic charity that helped families who had lost children, finding a painful, profound resonance with the legend of the sorrowful mother. She eventually found a quiet peace, a humility that had been scorched into her soul. Mark, the engineer, took a job not with a flashy tech firm, but with an engineering non-profit focused on flood control and disaster relief in developing countries. He designed systems to protect the vulnerable, his hands now building safeguards instead of enabling destruction. Sarah's tremor faded, though it would return faintly in times of great stress, a permanent, gentle reminder. She became a therapist specializing in trauma and grief, her own experience giving her an empathy that no textbook could ever teach. Liam, the filmmaker, sold all his high-end equipment. He used the money to buy a simple, sturdy camera and began traveling, making quiet, observational documentaries about small communities and their stories of faith and resilience. His work lost its slick edge and gained a deep, haunting soul. Jake, the philosopher, went on to get his doctorate, not in nihilism or existentialism, but in the philosophy of religion. He became a professor, known for his captivating lectures on the intersection of mystery, science, and the human spirit. He never offered easy answers, only profound questions. They rarely saw each other. They were bound together by a secret knowledge, a scar on their own souls that mirrored the beautiful rose-colored scar on the stone. They were living proof that the world was far stranger and more meaningful than they had ever imagined. That actions have echoes in realms they could not measure, and that some things, grief, faith, love, are forces as real as lightning, waiting for a moment to make themselves known. The statue still stands in her grotto, her rose quartz tears gleaming in the sun and the rain. She is a mother, sorrowful but merciful, a permanent reminder that from the darkest acts of man, the deepest scars, a miracle can sometimes bloom. And if you stand there quietly away from the noise of the world, you might just feel it, a sense of peace so deep it feels like a warning, and a love so vast it encompasses even our most terrible mistakes. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey into a story that lives in the space between a headline and a prayer, a reminder that the world holds deeper mysteries than we can ever truly understand. If this tale moved you, sent a chill down your spine, or made you look at the world a little differently, please let us know by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless stories waiting to be told, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one.